The Synod on Synodality marches on, and it looks like the laity participating have had the proposals go one step too far for them. And we will get to that in a moment. But I want to give you this first bit of breaking news that happened. It looks like late last night or early this morning, Diane Montagna, the journalist who last year was harassing the Synod fathers, if you want to call them that, and I think she was doing a great job doing it. She has this information. Just in, sources close to the Vatican say the Archbishop Emeritus of Dublin, uh, Archbishop Martin, I don't know how to pronounce that Irish name, and Archbishop Emeritus of Tours, France, Bernard Nicolas Aubertin, have been named the visitators for the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, the FSSP. Apostolic visitation announced in late September. So we now have names, and as I understand it, the Archbishop Emeritus of Dublin is extremely friendly to the James Martin crowd. However, from what I've heard, the Archbishop Emeritus of Tours is a little more friendly to tradition. So that's the update on that. I know many people will be interested in that, and I will follow that story when more news on that comes. But there is the Synod is, I think, wearing people out, and part of this that's going to be important for this is the lack of media attention being given to the Synod, because last year journalists showed up to all the press conferences, and for the most part, the Synod delegates hosting the press conferences had nothing of interest to say. So the media aren't here this year, except for a few really dedicated journalists, but for the most part, they're not there. Maybe they're covering the Synod from different angles, trying to get participants, especially among the laity or some of the cardinals, to give them information they're not supposed to have because they've all been sworn to not speak. But the coverage is definitely different this year, and that's important for our story. But at the press conference, Michael Haynes from LifeSite reports on this. He says, quote, from Cardinal LaCroix at yesterday's Synod presser, says this experience is prepping us to be men and women capable of listening to others, those different to each other. If we continue as a church to work this way, we will give the world a witness that it is possible to listen, to discern. End quote. And I am glad we're spending millions upon millions of dollars of Vatican resources on a glorified listening exercise, if we take what he said at face value, which I don't, because there's a lot more going on in this way. And I know I'm not the only one who feels that way, because the laity who are participating, these are handpicked laity, some of which are friendly to tradition, have had enough. Headline from the National Catholic Register. Synod proposal to decentralize doctrinal authority met with major pushback. Decentralizing doctrinal authority, or deciding certain doctrinal questions at local levels rather than universally, has been seen as a pivotal step for those aiming to make dramatic changes to Catholic teaching. And the laity don't want it. Now, the National Catholic Register is the print arm of EWTN, which some of the more wilder voices out there claims to be a traditionalist outlet. It's really a conservative outlet, and yes, there's a difference. So you will see the bent there, right? The dramatic changes to Catholic teaching that you see here. But the laity, this caused such an uproar, that proposal, that that they actually had to call in like theologians to calm everybody down, if you can believe it. This is written by Jonathan Lytle, and he posted links to this on Twitter, which is where I got it from, because weirdly, I don't use National Catholic Register as much as I should on this channel, simply because oftentimes they don't have the most cutting edge stories. You usually have to go to European outlets for that. But our takeaway here, as we go into this, because this article is worth looking into it at length, the takeaway here is the laity are having none of this synodality nonsense anymore. Even those who actually might want whatever synodality is, because what synodality has shown itself to be is a hand-waving away of Catholic teaching and an excuse to change church teaching by listening to people's needs and then giving them what they want, which is just modernism at its very worst. So let's go and take a look. From the article, quote, A proposal to decentralize doctrinal authority in the Catholic Church was met with significant pushback Wednesday. During the Synod on Synodality, 3 separate participants told the Register. The pushback took place as delegates considered a proposal in the Synod's Instrumentum Laboris, or working document, to recognize Episcopal conferences, quote, as ecclesial subjects endowed with doctrinal authority, assuming socio-cultural diversity within the framework of a multifaceted church. Let's pause there. They're using unnecessarily complex language, which helps to mask what they're doing. It's why things should be explained in everyday language as much as possible when the intended audience is supposed to be the average person. And when you're talking about synodality, the intended audience is always the average person. That's kind of the point of synodality, right? And yet they start using this kind of language, which causes a lot of people to check out. Let's continue. According to Synod sources, several delegates from multiple language groups and geographical backgrounds expressed concerns that the move would fracture church unity and relativize Catholic teaching. One Synod member described the degree of pushback as tremendous. A majority is clearly opposed, overwhelmingly, the delegate said, speaking on condition of anonymity, given the Synod's strict confidentiality rules. Another delegate told the Register that the concern expressed by the Assembly regarding the proposal was the most forceful yet during this Synod session, which started October 2nd and includes on October 27th. Since the Instrumentum Laboris was released in July, theological observers and Synod delegates have told the Register that they see the proposal to give Episcopal conferences doctrinal authority as one of the most critical topics on the entire agenda. Decentralizing doctrinal authority or deciding certain doctrinal questions at local levels rather than universally has been seen as a pivotal step for those aiming to make dramatic changes to Catholic teaching. For instance, the need for decentralized authority is regularly touted by the proponents of the German Synodal Way, which has pushed for changes to church teaching on matters of the flesh and male-only holy orders. The criticism of the Instrumentum Laboris' proposal first emerged October 16th, when the Synod's 5 language groups presented a summary of their small group discussions. Sources indicated that the concern about decentralizing doctrinal authority was most pronounced among the 1 French and 2 English language groups, as compared to the Spanish and Italian groups. Pause there again. And these are the two language groups, if you want to call them that, because the English language group here is going to include the United States and Canada. But these are the 2 also that you see getting the most attention from Rome on the liturgy. Traditionis Custodes was aimed at the French, the English, and the United States. That's where it was aimed at. So I'm not that surprised that you're getting the most pushback from these 2 groups as well. Criticism continued to pour in during free interventions or speeches made by individual Synod members before the entire assembly this morning. Sources said that the individual delegates spoke about the need to avoid falling into relativism while presenting the faith to different cultures, avoiding anything that would damage the unity of faith. The fact that the papacy and episcopacy are divinely constituted, while episcopal conferences are not, and that the church's oneness and Catholicity are threatened if the James Martin parody of holy matrimony is acceptable in one place and not the other. German Catholic media also reported on the pushback, quoting a Synod delegate who said in an intervention, "A fragmented faith also means a fragmented church." As another delegate put it to the Register, a majority of the interventions were not in the hoped-for direction, referring to a perceived desire among organizers for the proposal to be widely accepted. End quote. Like I said, this has a predetermined outcome, and the sooner people recognize it, the sooner we can actually brace ourselves for what's coming. But this was such a big deal that the Vatican had to bring the adults into the room to quiet the unruly children whom the Synod Fathers clearly feel should be thankful that they're even in the room participating in the first place. After all, the participation of everybody but the organizers was done so by invitation. Now, this is clearly, again, predetermined, but the pushback may let Francis know that the laity don't want what they're selling. And that may have a moderating tone on the document. And again, the modus operandi of Pope Francis has been whatever synod it is that they're holding, Pan-Amazon Synod, Synod Against the Family, whatever it was, they issue some sort of radical document, and then Francis responds with his own document that's more moderate looking while still being radical, but it's still more moderate than theirs. Go look at that Pan Amazon Synod document, or go look at uh, even the family Synod on the family. Amoris Laetitia looks more moderate than what they gave, which is astonishing if you think about it. But the laity don't want what Francis and his company are selling. That's important. It's a sign of hope. And we'll see how that goes. But they ended up bringing the adults into the room to actually quell dissent. The pushback was so significant that it seems to have prompted Synod organizers to make the unprecedented move of having a theological expert at the Synod, Father Gilles Rothier, give an impromptu presentation after the morning break before the whole assembly in an attempt to clarify the proposal and assuage concerns. One delegate called this highly unusual and said that it took me aback because the bishops and other Synod delegates had already expressed their views on the issue. And also, when you bring a theologian in, that's a sign of you're invoking authority. And what does the Synod preach? What do the Synodalists preach? They preach against authority. That in the room, everybody, whether it's the Pope or the cardinals and the laity or the religious, they're all on an equal playing field. They're all on equal footing. So when you bring in a theologian, you're invoking authority to try to quell dissent. It's symbolically very important. Delegates who spoke to the register said that the French-Canadian theologian's presentation seemed to satisfy some in the assembly, but that they still had their concerns. One Synod source said that Father Rothier's argument that local councils had always had doctrinal authority in the Church's tradition raised concerns about why the proposal to extend the authority to episcopal conferences was even needed. Another Synod member expressed concern that Father Rothier seemed to imply that the doctrinal authority a bishop's conference would be based on the hierarchy of truths, possibly implying that while some central dogmas would be maintained by the Church's universal teaching authority in Rome, local conferences would be able to teach authoritatively in other areas. And that's relativism. This delegate said that they expect organizers to take pushback against the proposal into account when drafting the Synod's final document. If not, then I would feel honestly that we're being manipulated by these theologians. The final document would then be presented to Pope Francis, who could refer to it as issuing his own teaching document, or could even accept the text as is, giving it magisterial authority. The day's debates over decentralizing doctrinal authority were referenced at the Synod's daily press briefing, with spokespeople noting that calls to avoid fragmentation of the Church came up in the assembly. And you can keep reading that if you want to yourself. I'll have links to it in my show notes at returntotradition.org. Now, I have not a lot of hope that their concerns will be taken all that seriously. Decentralizing church's authority away from Rome has been in the playbook of the modernists for decades. It's what they've been pushing for a very long time. That is what they want. They have never hidden that. That's why you get this conciliarism and collegiality and everything else. All these attempts to bring the power of individual bishops up to the level of the papacy, especially bishops as a body. It's a good example of this is all that talk in that article and at the Synod of ecclesiastical, meaning bishops, conferences, the national conferences. Those did not exist before Vatican II. National bishops' conferences are a post-conciliar innovation. They have no theological grounding. They're based purely on the modern structure of the world. Hopefully they're temporary. There's a lot of damage has been done with those national bishops' conferences. Go look at some of the post-conciliar innovations, communion in the hand, and a lot of that stuff comes from those organizations. Now, that article did point out that there were mentioned press conferences, but something worth noting here about the Synod has been that the media in general have tuned the entire thing out. Yes, obviously the National Catholic Register is doing some reporting, and the National Catholic Reporter and these other places are doing some reporting. But if you actually watch the press conferences, which video of it gets tweeted by the synod.va account, you'll see the video of it. The press pool is mostly empty. Instead of having a lot of journalists there like there were last year, now there's very few. I don't even know if Diane Montani is participating anymore, because last year she grilled these guys, and now I haven't seen any footage of her doing that this year. And the modernists are using that as a sign of essentially weakness and the defeat of the people resisting Francis, which is really funny. It's a gaslighting idea they have here, but their headline is, unlike at Francis's past synods, conservative resistance sits out this year's summit. Yeah, that's nonsense. But they are right. There are very few journalists there anymore. And here's why. If you watch their pressers, they will speak for a long time and only vaguely tell you about anything that happened. They'll give you very few details. And then it'll be like watching a political candidate who doesn't want to answer a journalist's questions basically try to filibuster the interviewer by just giving empty platitudes. It's a lot like watching one of those kind of things. When you watch these pressers, they say very, very little unless really pressed. But there has also been a lot of coverage of the synod by these, what they're going to call far right outlets already. They're talking to people who are participating, getting leaks from the synod. That's how I've been able to report every single day for the last 2 weeks, basically, on the synod to you. It's because there are people getting information from there. It's just not happening at the pressers anymore. But here is what they have to, here's what the National Catholic Reporter has to say. They basically start by talking about how conservative media has asked hard questions at each point of each of the synods that have happened under Francis. Now, not so much in the second phase of the Synod on Synodality, is because the media has basically given up on the traditional mechanisms for getting information. Then the article comes to this, quote, but this year, as Francis's years-long Synod on Synodality inches toward its October 27th conclusion, the resistance has effectively gone silent. It marks a stark contrast to last year, where ahead of the first session of the Synod on Synodality, far-right Latin American groups with deep ties to traditionalist Catholics in the United States released a book titled The Synodal Process is a Pandora's Box. You remember that book? Yeah. The book was published in 8 languages and sent to a number of synod delegates and Vatican Curia officials. And the day before the synod commenced, a Roman theater was rented out for one of the Pope's chief critics, U.S. Cardinal Raymond Burke, to present the text and make his case against the synod. Even poking fun at it has become a bit tedious, wrote Canadian Father Raymond de Souza on the pages of First Things, on the eve of this year's synod gathering. That sentiment seems to be matched here on the ground, where there have been no real efforts to organize synod side events by those who have typically opposed the process or sought to warn against its potential outcomes. Even reporters from right-wing media websites that have spent years sounding the alarm against the synod have gone quiet, both in print and inside the Vatican's press office. The explanation is really simple, said Jesuit Father Thomas Rees, a longtime Vatican observer who has covered synods since 1985. Francis took all the controversial hot-button issues off the agenda, so the conservatives have nothing to complain about. They can basically declare victory, Rees told the National Catholic Reporter. You had something people could get their teeth in, both the progressives and the reactionaries, and it was easy to see the fight, said Rees of the atmosphere surrounding past synods. By contrast, the most concrete changes that have surfaced inside the Synod Hall at this year's summit have involved changes in canon law to better promote transparency and accountability. That's remarkable that they're saying that, because what did I just get done telling you about? This decentralization scheme. Again, this is like a dispatch from an alternative universe. In his last article before his passing in January 2023, Australian Cardinal George Pell fumed that the upcoming Synod on Synodality was a nightmare. With the Pope's study groups halting the dreams of many reform-minded advocates, conservatives seem to have made the bet that at this synod, it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. End quote. They're still discussing radical changes to the faith at the synod. It just doesn't seem radical to the National Catholic Reporter because they are on the side of these things. See, conservative media have tuned out because the media have ignored the decentralization of the doctrinal authority argument in the Instrumentum Laboris. Most media isn't even covering it. The National Catholic Register is, LifeSite is, seems to be about it. Hopefully today we will see more media show up at the press conferences and ask hard questions about the stupid plan of the Vatican's and give due coverage to it. Now I'm going to show you, to close this out, just how silly everything you just heard from the National Catholic Reporter is. So we're going to do what looks like we're moving on. You see, the synod has been focused on something rather silly. And I say silly because it's heresy, and heresy is always worth mocking. Yes, you can mock heresy. You can mock terrible ideas, and people, you can even to a degree mock those who are married to terrible, terrible ideas. The radical delegates keep bringing this up. These are ladies who cannot take Pope Francis's no for an answer. Now, I am not one who wants to, give him accolades for saying things in public that he may backtrack on in the future, given his track record on these things. But for the immediate now, they refuse to take his answer at face value. So you get this from the Global Sisters Report. This is a website for very, very much post-conciliar style nuns who rarely wear habits, despite this nun on the picture here wearing a habit. Their headline is, "The Potential of Women's Consecrated Life as a Sacrament Equal to Holy Orders." Take all the time you need to wrap your head around that statement. Nuns are usually consecrated. Sacraments, like holy orders, involve consecration. Ergo, why don't we just invent an eighth sacrament? This is what's being discussed at the Synod. I don't believe Francis will go for this. But the media should be covering this stuff and warning people about this, because these are the people who were invited to participate at the Synod. The nuns who wrote this article are saying that either the consecration of nuns should be recognized as part of the sacrament of holy orders, or that the consecration of nuns should be declared a sacrament, basically an eighth sacrament. What's more, they not only want to be deaconettes, they want to be named bishops. And think about the implication of that. What happens if you get a lady bishop? Other than it being an invalid consecration and all the rest of it, because you cannot confer holy orders that way, and it would just be somebody play acting as a bishop. But what, in a fundamental, concrete sense, would happen? What does that open the door to? If you get a lady bishop, you can get a popette, a lady pope. This needs to be resisted hard, and it needs to be mocked. Yes, mocked. There is a place for mocking terrible ideas, and heresy should be mocked. But any way you look at it, their proposal here is heresy. And if we had decent leadership in Rome, they'd be told unequivocally no, and warned that what they propose is heresy, that they place their souls in serious danger promoting these ideas, and they place the souls of others in very serious danger when they convince other people to adopt this terrible idea. But that's not going to happen, because Francis is not in the business of correcting heretics. He's in the business of going after traditionalists with his biting words. If you don't believe me for what I'm telling you here, let's go to the article. Quote, "Enough is enough, say women from every part of the world at every step of the Synod on Synodality. We want to be treated as equals, not only theoretically, in dignity, but also in church ministry. Unfortunately, the present understanding of holy orders," let me say that again, the present understanding of holy orders, meaning the Catholic understanding of holy orders that's been unchanged since, the Last Supper, are neither reserved for men, upholds hierarchical states of life, and perpetuates patriarchy and discrimination. To settle this issue of women's longing for equality in leadership, it is often proposed that women should also receive the sacrament of holy orders. However, I think most women are neither interested in becoming clerics nor mere administrators. Rather, they just want the church to declare that women are not excluded from ordained ministries because of their flesh. Could we explore alternatives? For example, if consecrated life were recognized as a sacrament, the issue would be largely resolved. It would be like hitting two birds with one stone, as vocations to consecrated life for women would likely increase, thereby helping reduce the shortage of priests in several parts of the world. How would this happen? In an earlier column, which I see as foundational to my suggestion, I mentioned that Paul's words, "Christ is the head of every man, and a husband the head of his wife, and God the head of Christ," see 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3, could imply that Christ becomes the head of a woman united with him in consecrated life, just as he is the head of every male priest. Both are answerable to him. I don't think Paul's words intend to convey that men should dominate women. Instead, he is trying to find a workaround to patriarchal arguments based on the Old Testament. which are becoming obstacles to women's ministry in the church. Let's pause there. He's trying to undermine the old law. Now, he doesn't need to undermine the old law. He abolished the old law, but he's not abolishing the morality that came down from on high to the keepers of the old law. Nor is he undermining, trying to get rid of the old social arrangements. They turn Christ into a revolutionary. That's what they do here. That's why he adds, woman is not independent of man, or man of woman in the Lord. For just as woman came from man, so man is born of a woman. Accepting Jesus as the Lord demands a new way of life. A consecrated woman can become another Christ through imitation of him and a life of holiness in union with him. It is unnecessary for any disciple to be male to represent them. Thus, her status as a minister becomes equivalent to that of a priest. Does this imply consecrated women can take up the same roles in ministries as those of priests? Maybe, or maybe not. This needs more reflection. However, appointing women bishops from consecrated life could be the beginning of an alternative pathway to leadership and ministry in the church. Women have been apostles in the early church. Who but women are blessed with the natural gifts of birthing, feeding, nurturing, and teaching? Isn't grace said to be built on nature? Moreover, servant leadership is natural to most women, although it could be said to be a positive side effect of patriarchy if it does not turn into servitude. Enough of that. They're not hiding it. They're not hiding it. Again, this is why Catholic media, hostile to the Synod, should be at the Synod to catch all this stuff. This is what they're talking about there. I don't think they're going to get very far with this, but they are fully embracing heterodoxy. They're giving voice to this stuff and then going to invite them back next year to be in their little working groups, who will then issue their own little reports to Francis, and he can issue 1 or 5 documents, either confirming what they say or giving a more moderate version of it, or, God willing, rejecting their nonsense, although I don't think the latter is going to happen. But that is what you're seeing. They don't hide their contempt for Scripture, for the magisterial authority, or for, in general, the faith traditions that go back 2,000 years. They don't have any respect for it. They impose modern values, modern philosophy, modern errors on the church, and then demand that the church accept them, that the church submit to the wisdom of the modern world. It's nonsense. It's dangerous nonsense, and it should be resisted at every turn. And unfortunately, they're given a voice at the Synod. And traditionally minded Catholics are few at the Synod, if any. It's practically a miracle that there's enough Catholics at the Synod rejecting all this decentralization nonsense that we hear so much about. Wonder if they will call the adults into the room the next time a nun gets up there and demands to be made a bishop, like they did when I reported to you earlier that they brought the adult theologians into the room to let people know that, oh, you don't have to worry too much about the decentralization thing. We already have most of that now anyway. You think they're going to give them equal treatment? I kind of doubt it. Let's take a look here at the live chat. You should see what the study groups are talking about. I mean, that's what the decentralization comes from, Chesty. That's what one of them where they comes from, is the decentralization groups. And that's where this nun comes from. It is so ridiculous what's going on. Cat Z2 says, what comes to mind is Eve trying to get Adam to eat the apple. Yeah, no, that's kind of a new apple being brought to them. Church is faced with this all the time and usually resists it. But it's going to take a long time to get this stuff under control. And Rome's going to have to lead. It's going to have to lead. Did I hear what happened at that dinner last night? Yes, I did. I watched that clip this morning. It was funny, a little spicy for some people, though, so I would caution people. He doesn't use any bad language or anything, but he does make some jokes that he even admits were pretty terrible at the end. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. If there's any final thoughts, this is your chance to get them in. And otherwise, I ask you, as I always do, to pray for the church and for everybody that we're talking about here today. Maureen says, let's pray they are jumping the shark. Anthony's totally correct. Yeah, that's my hope. that that these people just feel emboldened to just say bizarre nonsense. Again, thanks very much for tuning in today. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.